Hi, and welcome to another brand and strategy positioning done for a Sri Lankan company. I'm Shaveen Bandaranaike. We were approached by TotalPay in order to establish what could easily be called a Sri Lankan alternative to the internationally recognized PayPal. TotalPay is a unified payment solutions platform that allows consumers, both business to business as well as business to consumer level, to work in tandem with themselves as well as the government. Moreover, it's one of the front ends of the newly established national payment platform, which has been spearheaded by the state. The primary Marcom objectives that we outlined for ourselves before proceeding with the strategic as well as the creative execution of this brand was thus: first, to build brand awareness, to make sure that the consumers at large were aware of such an initiative being started by a private entity such as TotalPay. To build trust with the consumer, considering the fact that this related to money or financial transactions, one of the major elements was to instill trust in a demographic that was only now getting accustomed to online transactions. Establish how secure this system is in line with this trust. Attract both corporates and individuals. As noted earlier, this was both a B2B and a B2C initiative. Increase traffic towards this system. There are certain ad hoc systems currently in place which have been established by different banks in which consumers and corporates are utilizing these services. Now it was time to congregate them towards TotalPay. Finally, to drive the usage of the services which have been offered, to make this the chosen alternative. Once we identified these Marcom objectives, we had a look at the different pain points of the brand and the service itself, as in TotalPay. On the one hand, there was a requirement in relation to security. There were certain hurdles that the consumer or the person who is utilizing this service had to go through before actually beginning usage. The connection of the banks themselves was another issue that had to be overcome. Several of the banks that TotalPay were partnered with, in fact, had their own services in place which consumers were now accustomed to. Asking them to leave those services and then integrate their existing banks to this service would be a challenge. Before we proceeded with any sort of creative or strategic implementation, we considered several insights in relation to financial transactions as a whole, as well as people's perceptions. Firstly, digitization was considered to be a niche perception at the moment. So once you consider with the mass perception of digitization, there is a problem that existed. Next, there was an issue with non-conformance. The whole perception of e-money and transactions online was relatively new to the Sri Lankan market. Although there were certain e-commerce companies currently in operation with several millions in transactions on a weekly and sometimes monthly basis, this was still difficult to fathom in relation to such obstacles like connecting state-run functionality as well as corporate infrastructure into this payment system. The whole perception itself when it comes to payment in the Sri Lankan context is that of a negative connotation. The mood when you talk about payment or paying of a bill or something to that effect is that of pain. And this was actually a tentpole that we identified when moving forward with our strategy. The consumer competitor nexus was established with three major competitors in place. One of the major players being Easy Cash, which had the advantage of being quite prevalent in the industry, therefore the awareness being present. However, the adoption was quite limited. Credit cards are another form of payment where the advantage being in relation to the banks offering several discounts and promotions for various outlets and merchants that they are partnered with. The whole notion of buy now, pay later, the credit facility provided, was also an attracting component for consumers. Vishwa, which is a proprietary service of Sampath Bank PLC, one of the major banks in the country, was also steadily growing in terms of its technology as well as prevalence in the industry. People tended to trust one which comes directly from a bank which has over a 25-year history in the country. Once we identified this, one of the major elements was that payment was correlated with pain, negativeness, as well as loss, something going out of pocket. Moreover, the payment process, which is something that we will be addressing with this service, with TotalPay itself, was considered to be an insult to injury. Based on these elements, we identified both the primary as well as the secondary unique selling propositions. On the one hand, the primary USPs of TotalPay were identified as the ability to connect multiple bank accounts and the payment to government institutions in one click. Up until this point, even having proprietary services by, for example, Sampath Bank or Commercial Bank or Hatton National Bank (HNB) did not allow you to make payments on a mass scale to places such as the customs of Sri Lanka. The secondary USPs were identified as the ease of collections, faster payments from customers, easy reconciliation, safe and security, better cash flow, schedule and forget features that were available in the service, as well as the ability to track and view history. These secondary and primary USPs were split between both the usual B2C consumer as well as the B2B or the business corporates. Now that we have identified the actual outline as well as the insights surrounding this concept, we began our strategy. There were two approaches that we suggested to TotalPay. The first being to roll out all services which are applicable to corporates as well as individual consumers at once, or secondly, to roll out the corporate and the SME sectors together and the consumer push to happen thereafter. What we recommended, however, was to go with approach 1. Based on this aspect, the core marketing communications platform would be to brand TotalPay as a hassle-free mode of payment. The fact that it just works and it alleviates the pain of payment. This insight of payment being equated to pain and the process itself of paying being adding insult to injury meant that we positioned TotalPay as a pain reliever. The subordinate branch Marcoms was in relation to both the corporates and the SMEs as well as the consumer. So the trickle-down effect from the brand Marcom was that in relation to the corporates, being a total solution similar to an ERP, which is hassle-free and painless, which allows corporates to make government payments, making it a financial ERP on its own and a total solution. In relation to the consumer, we wanted to make it as a single point of interaction, which is a one wallet concept. Again, it becomes a portal that is trusted by the state, by the government, as well as for your own individual purposes. Connecting multiple bank accounts would be an ease from this point as well as usage. Once we identified this core as well as a subordinate marketing communications mantra, we moved on to identifying the core mediums by which we will communicate this. Since this is a national platform, quite a substantial investment had to be made on both ATL or above the line and BTL below the line. In relation to the brand as a whole, we wanted to use television, radio and press, which are traditional modes of communication. Secondarily, in relation to corporates and SME, to drive the message home, we wanted to have a PR push which is supported by the government along with event sponsorships to get greater visibility among the demographic, among the B2B demographic. In relation to the consumer, we would go a bit more tactical by partnering with several vendors, similar to the merchant infrastructure that most banks adopt for their credit card promotions, as well as creating a loyalty program. Once we had this concept in mind and the core messaging, our big idea fell into place. And for this purpose, the communication that we went with was pay with no pain. TotalPay, pay with no pain. In order to drive the message home for both the corporate sector as well as the average normal consumer, we wanted to begin by establishing a teaser campaign that showed the adverse impact of not having an automated process similar to this. The very first teaser we wanted to establish was a government office in Sri Lanka, which is usually empty by 4 p.m. Secondly, a situation where you come home in the evening only to discover that since you'd forgotten to pay your electricity bill on time, they've barred you from electricity. Thirdly, the seamlessly endless line at several government establishments where you have to wait for your turn. And finally, in a spot of irony, to showcase how average, normal systems which are in place at these establishments are prone to failure on load. Once the teasers were established, and once we created a scenario where you would need a system which goes beyond this, the press campaign would begin with TotalPay being introduced to the public.